welcome to another episode of Sports 101, the sports show that discusses sport beyond the X's and O's. We like to expand our conversation to include history in the past, present, as well as in the making, and we also look at the game from a people, places, and cultural perspective. I'm your host, Jamar Harp. Be sure to follow me on social media at Coach_Hart412 and Facebook under Jamar Harp. Make sure you get social with Sports 101 and the litany of other shows on SportsZone Chicago while following SportsZone Chicago on social media as well, too. SportsZone Chicago can be found on Twitter at SportsZone CHI, Facebook at SportsZone Chicago, and Instagram at SportsZone Chicago. Please remember the great announcement we had last week. Remember, you can go to your Roku, or any of your smart devices, type in SportsZone Chicago, download that channel. So you can catch up with our flagship show, Sean and Maya in the morning, and countless other shows. Remember, SportsZone Chicago is now on Roku. Please keep in mind that SportsZone Chicago is the world's only Black-owned sports talk app. Again, you can watch and listen to my show, our flagship show, Sean and Maya in the morning, and countless other shows. If you have a favorite team or region of the country, check them out as well, too. If you miss anything, don't worry about it. Just go to YouTube and search SportsZone Chicago and add that channel. Now, if you do that, we need everyone, and I mean everyone, to download the SportsZone Chicago app. You can find your SportsZone Chicago app in the iTunes, Google Play, Amazon stores, and again now, exclusively on Roku. That's right, SportsZone Chicago is now on Roku or your favorite smart device. Now I'd like to talk about this week's episode. Again, you can see SportsZone Chicago right there with Chicago's native own Justin Fields, who looks to have a great year this year. Again, please check out SportsZone Chicago on Roku. Now I'd like to talk about this week's episode, which is about the Big 32 Big 10 conference expansion. So recently, if you look at our title picture right here, you'll see USC and UCLA helmets. They've decided to leave the Pac-12, which has been a sister conference with the Big 10 for over 100 years, and join the Big 10. This has caused a lot of multiple waves within college football, and again, it's changing the landscape as we know it, which will again change in the next few years, and who knows what we'll see by the year 2026. So let's talk about this week's episode in USC and UCLA. Now, again, USC and UCLA, they're two of the Pac-12's blue blood flagship programs. They were notified Thursday night that their application to join the Big Ten has been accepted, and now these West Coast teams in Southern California are members of the Big Ten Conference, who staked this name in the Midwest. The schools will begin conference play in 2024, so this will be their last year involved with the Pac-12. Here's a geographical picture. I don't know what happened to it, but if you look to the far left, which is the state of California, you'll see USC and UCLA. And then the top part of the graph, which is the Big Ten country, you'll see the rest of the Big Ten schools going all the way down to New Jersey, Piscataway, in fact, or the central New Jersey, where Rutgers is, which is the Big Ten footprint. So if you can kind of look at this map, if we were in the 1860s, before the Civil War, pretty much, and when you talk about major college football, the upper portion of the United States is Big Ten country. The lower portion is SEC, and then USC and UCLA have joined the mix with the Big Ten. Now, the Big Ten issued a statement that said the vote was unanimous when the conference presidents and chancellors met on the addition of these two schools last Thursday evening. USA Athletic Director Mike Bohn called the Big Ten the best home for USC and Trojan athletics as they move into the new world of collegiate sports. Bohn also stated that we will also benefit from stability and strength of the conference, the athletic caliber of Big Ten institutions, the increased visibility, exposure, and resources the conference will bring our student athletes and all its athletic programs. They will also benefit on the ability to expand engagement with our passionate alumni nationwide. So basically what they're saying is if you're a USC or UCLA alum and you move to the East Coast or Central Time Zone, now you don't have to stay up as late to watch your games. They fit the Big Ten mold in regards to academics and education. Remember, all the Big Ten schools are R1 research institutions, so they want to bring in schools on that same moniker, both academically and athletically. USC and UCLA have to make the right decisions to position themselves best for the long term. And that came from a source familiar with the move that works inside ESPN. They also said that the future is uncertain, so they need to be operating from a position of strength versus weakness. So basically, it's whoever hunts first, gets the biggest piece of meat. Instead of waiting for all these conferences to realign or what the Pac-12 is going to do, basically what USC and UCLA did was say, hey, we see Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC. We see people aggressively trying to get in the Big 12 to replace Texas and Oklahoma. If we look at us and let's say maybe Oregon and Washington, we're the top 4 teams in the Pac-12. Stanford, maybe you want to throw in a 5. So do we want to wait and think that the Pac-12 is going to be on the same level as the Big Ten or SEC? Or are we going to jump and make a move right now? Remember, the Big Ten and the Pac-12 always play together in the Rose Bowl as their sister conferences. The Pac-12 substantially recent statement last Thursday saying it was extremely surprised and disappointed by the news of UCLA and USC, 2 of its flagship institutions, leaving the Pac-12. It was stated that the Pac-12 was home to many of the world's best universities, athletic programs, and alumni, representing one of the most dynamic regions in the United States. We've long been known as a conference of champions, and we're unwavering in our commitment to extend that title. So if you ever saw the commercials of the Pac-12 and you see conference of champions outside of the quote-unquote revenue sports, which are football and men's and women's basketball, the Pac-12 is consistently at the top, if not winning all these non-revenue Title IX or Olympic sports, however you would like to name them. Henceforth, the moniker of a championship conference. Again, so why are they looking to do this? This is the reason they can do this. One fact is, and not be less disrupted or not to pay the money, is that the ACC, is that the USC and UCLA have a grant of rights tied to the current Pac-12 television contracts. So again, let me clarify, similar to the teams that wanted to join or leave the ACC that had to pay an interest or exit fee, USC and UCLA won't have to do that because they have rights tied into the big Pac-12's television contract. Now that television contract expires after the 2023 football season and after the 2023 school year. So after football season, football will be free to negotiate. And then after that school year, all the teams at USC and UCLA will do it. So that's why the expectation was that both schools will try to jump now and go to a league for the 2024-25 season and not to suffer any financial penalties, which is very smart. Pac-12 officials countered this by saying they got sooner than horned, referencing how Oklahoma and Texas left the Big 12 for the SEC. And this came from a high-ranking official at one of the Pac-12 schools in a conversation with ESPN. He also stated that financial pressures being felt by the Pac-12 were similar to those being felt by the ACC and other conferences, as conference revenue projections, which can vary and are not always straight line in regards to donations and when come in, because some people can pledge. Like, for example, Diddy just pledged $1 million to Howard and Jackson State. So he can pay that $1 million in increments of $50,000 a year, $20,000, $100,000. So that's why all the times these donations aren't very linear. Now, those financial pressures left USC and UCLA with the choice of one or two options, either bullying the Pac-12 for unequal revenue shares or going elsewhere and having a seat at a table for a long-term, more lucrative financial deal. Now, the impact of the finances will allow them to not only stay competitive nationally in football, but they also will be able to sustain the support for all their other sports, including the women's sports, non-revenue sports, or Olympic sports that I referenced earlier. Now, it's going to be very interesting to see how this will affect Fox's upcoming television deal with the Big Ten, which is expected to be announced in the upcoming weeks. Why is that so? Because the addition of two pertinent schools in Los Angeles, one of the biggest markets in the United States, will be appealing to advertisers that wanted to get on this Big Ten deal. The move is also gutting for the future the Pac-12 as Fox added investment in UCLA and USC's inventory in the Big Ten means that investments in the Pac-12, which Fox had owned a part of, you remember if you look at football season, you want to watch the Pac-12, you got to watch Fox or FS1 at like 10:45 at night. So when this happens, this is going to leave the Pac-12 conference with Oregon and Washington as its two blue blood schools after losing its biggest brands in its biggest market, Los Angeles. Now let's talk about the reasons why USC and UCLA would like to move to the Big Ten. Now UCLA was looking to move because they faced the possibility of cutting almost half of the sports programs. And this is from a report from the Los Angeles Times. So there, again, Title IX comes into play. If we look at Title IX, which means you have the equal opportunity and scholarships for men's sports as women's sports, the Pac-12, in particular USC and UCLA, being a conference of champions or institutions in this conference of champions, fielded a lot of these sports. Now, after the pandemic and other things happen, with these sports being non-revenue, strings begin to dry up. So if they did not move to the Big Ten due to lack of revenue, they would have been forced to cut a majority of its sports, which would then force it to be in compliance with Title IX. So that's one of the main reasons that UCLA was looking to leave. Now, this influx of money that's potentially going to come from the Big Ten or will come from the Big Ten is definitely important to UCLA, whose athletic department had a $102 million budget deficit over the past 3 years. So just think of that. If you were a restaurant, there's no way you can operate for 3 years with a total deficit of over $100 million. Again, this is due to all the monies coming in from football and basketball being dispersed. But again, in efforts to keep everyone the same, have the same monetary support, the same scholarships, clothing, travel, etc., the football teams and basketball teams are paying out of their pockets to the other schools. So although the department is operating at a revenue loss, is due to the revenues not being able to completely be kept within football and basketball, as well as the non-revenue sports, obviously not, producing revenue. Now, the timing isn't certain, and the number of teams that would have been affected isn't known, but the Bruins were headed toward an Olympic sports Armageddon without the infusion of cash that would accompany the departure from the Pac-12 and joining the Big Ten in 2024. Now, with a move to the Big Ten, UCLA should be able to make enough money to keep their Olympic sports going in the future, again, to these television deals. The last wave of college football media rights deals has left the sport basically a two-horse race between the Big Ten and the SEC for the largest media contract. Now, currently, the SEC still dominates on the field, having won 12 of the last 16 national championships with blue blood programs such as Alabama, Auburn. Those have been the powerhouses lately in the SEC. Texas A&M is making some noise recently, but I would consider those two programs as probably the tops recently. And then when you look at the SEC, again, with the additions of Texas and Oklahoma, they're saying we brought in two teams, two markets, so now let's up our revenue deal. But the Big Ten, got them because they got the Los Angeles market. So the Big Ten is essentially from coast to coast. They have representation in New Jersey and California and throughout the Midwest. So that thanks to a landmark TV deal that the Big Ten will be inking, or they inked starting in 2017. And that first deal ran for 6 years and was worth $2.6 billion. I want to show you a quick video produced by the Winning Curve to talk to you a little bit about these projects. I also forgot.
Let's dive into the Big Ten meetings, and we will, let's see, go on and toss this up on the screen here All right. So the Big Ten and, of course, Fox and all of these different TV networks are meeting this week to go over their deals. And I would not imagine that we're going to hear any kind of an announcement this week. I think that we will get those once we get into July for media days. But looking at the list of people that are interested in the Big Ten media rights, they're meeting with Amazon, CBS, NBC, ESPN, and then, of course, there is Warner Brothers Discovery, which has bought out Turner Sports, and Apple. Those two are expected to be dark horses on this. I would not expect them to be involved here. Remember, Fox is going to get the biggest part of this package. But interesting article out of SI today. Richard Johnson, who is over at SportsZone Duo, he had a very interesting take on this. Possibly giving, CBS a Big Ten game for their afternoon slot. Fox, of course, will still take the biggest ones, but give CBS a Big Ten game in the afternoon, and then NBC would take a Big Ten night game. And there are massive properties in the Big Ten. Splitting them between 3 different broadcast companies is an interesting concept. My question here was, are the smaller brands worth enough to CBS and NBC for them to actually put big money into this? And with the money that Fox is already giving them, you don't have to have a lot from those. But does CBS want their national broadcast, their main game, to be something along the lines of Wisconsin and Northwestern? Is that what they want? Because if you're CBS, you can't just dock that over to CBS Sports Network or whatever. You can't just dock that somewhere else. You only have a limited number of games that you can choose from because Fox is going to take the biggest one. Now, saying that, do they end up implementing some kind of thing, some kind of clause in the contract, the same way that CBS and ESPN do, where in the SEC, one team cannot be on CBS more than 5 times a year? Okay. Maybe they do something along those lines. But I'm curious what they end up doing here. Regardless, the deal is going to be worth more than $1 billion a year. It's going to be huge. And then, of course, the SECs, once all that stuff gets done with Texas and Oklahoma, that is going to dwarf this. That's my assumption. Not dwarf, maybe a bad choice of words. But I would imagine that the SECs is going to be bigger. All the different valuations, all the different things going on out there right now show that the SEC will be pulling in about $117 million, $118 million per team per season. And in this one, the Big Ten will be pulling in, over $100 million per school, somewhere around there. So I'm curious about this one as well. If I'm Apple, do I really want to get tied up in this to get minor brands? Like, do I want Northwestern and Illinois? I don't know. I don't know. So, but same can be said for NBC. Like, if you can guarantee that CBS and, CBS and NBC, we'll say that those two are the lead ones. If you can guarantee each one of those, Michigan or Penn State, right? If Fox takes Ohio State, then CBS has to get Michigan and NBC has to get Penn State. Then around and around each different week, right? Then one week Fox takes Penn State, the next week CBS gets Ohio State, and then Michigan goes to NBC, something like that. If you can guarantee that the biggest brands get on these different properties and they are in primetime spots, maybe it's worth it.
Again, thank you so much. That video is brought to you by Winning Cures Everything podcast. Please check those guys out. So basically the synopsis is what they were talking about is the Big Ten is potentially negotiating a deal within multiple streaming or television networks where they can get up to 3 to support their conference, which again spans from College Park, Maryland, and New Jersey on the East Coast to the Midwest to USC and UCLA on the West Coast. The issue is they don't want all the top teams to play on the same networks all the time, and will the networks be able to support the lower level teams in the Big Ten? I definitely think so. Again, growing up in Big Ten country, I'm used to watching Penn State. They were Penn State and Ohio State were the top teams at that time. When I was growing up in the late 80s, early 90s, then Michigan came along. But what they used to do was the 12 o'clock slots. That's where you would see your Rutgers or your low-level Big East teams as well, too. Because, again, the Big East was still functioning at that time. So basically what you would do is you would rotate your 12 p.m. games with your lowest ranked teams. Your mid-afternoon, your 3:30s would be the middle of the pack. And then your night slots would be for your, top 4, top 5 teams in the Big Ten. And I think if it rotated that way, then, everyone would be happy. Now, if you compare that with the Pac-12 deal, it's worth $3 billion, but lasting 12 years. So when this deal is rumored that if it comes through, each team will get $1 million or over $1 million, let's say $110 million a year for this television deal. And that's just for this deal. So that's each team getting $110 million. Now, once Texas and Oklahoma join the SEC, again, just like in sports, whoever signs that deal was the highest at that time, then the next one's coming is going to beat that. So it's rumored that the SEC deal, including Texas and Oklahoma, will be at maybe 120 to 130 million per school. And then that'll change again once, let's say, the Big Ten adds Washington and the University of Oregon, and then the SEC adds 2 more teams. So eventually we end up with this, Super 32 of 2 conferences. I'm leaving out the quote-unquote Power 5, and you're seeing the dissolvement of, the Pac-12 and, all the rest of the mediocre conferences, Big 12. I don't want to say mediocre, but they wouldn't be on the same par with the Big Ten and SEC at that time. So again, moving forward, reports indicate that the Big Ten can make up to $1 billion per year on this next media deal, netting each member school around $62 million per year. That's compared to the $33 million the Pac-12 handed out to each school in its most recent report to its deal. USC and UCLA stand to make somewhere around $80 million annually by joining the Big Ten, which is in the process of negotiating new television contracts. And again, this massive influx of cash can pay for these non-revenue sports in the conference or teams from the former conference of champions. And also the Big Ten can become the first conference to bring in $1 billion annually from television deals. The Pac-12 distributed only $19 million to each of its members in the 2021 fiscal year, which is a pittance compared with the other Power 5 conferences. Now, each SEC team received $54 million, and each Big Ten team receives $46 million. And those payouts will only increase because of the new television deals, which are written to ensure conferences get more money by poaching other major schools, hence this arms racing conference alignment. By waiting until 2024 to join the Big Ten, UCLA and USC would have suffered financial penalties, number one, for leaving the Pac-12, and also the conference would have not known what type of grant of rights agreements it had going into its next television deal. So it was imperative to get out now while this deal was expiring. This means that the Pac-12 will receive the media rights money that any departing team will receive from its new conference, even though they no longer were in the conference. However, this grant of rights deal expires after the 2022-23 academic year, meaning UCLA and USC will owe nothing to the Pac-12 if they leave after this year. So again, either you can leave this year and pay nothing, or you can leave and the next year and they give the Pac-12 a portion of the money you got for the Big Ten, which the reason for leaving is so you can pay for your non-revenue sports and stay on par with the SEC. Next, let's discuss the Pac-12 without USC and UCLA. Now, Pac-12 officials reportedly were blindsided by this news that, again, 2 of its blue blood Southern California, Los Angeles anchors were leaving the conference. The 2 powers have been playing in the Pac-12 or its forebears since the 1920s, and their departures leave the remaining schools Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, Colorado, Washington, Washington State, Stanford, California, Oregon, and Oregon State, with an essential problem and few good options. As a Pac-12 member, USC was integral in the integration of college football. They did a lot with that. A lot of people don't recall this. This picture right here is of Sam Cunningham. Sam Cunningham is the older brother of Randall Cunningham, and he led USC to a historic victory over Alabama in Tuscaloosa in 1970. So in the 1970s, at this time, the Southwestern Athletic Conference, with Grambling, Jackson State, Southern, teams like that, they were still one of the prominent conferences in all of America due to the racial practices at this time. So, in particularly in Alabama and its flagship university, University of Alabama, it was segregated. They started to let a few black students in, but Bill Bryant wouldn't allow individuals of African descent on his football team. However, this game against USC and their integrated team led Bill Bryant to change his tune, as well as others in the now defunct Southwest Conference, which most teams make up the SEC now. So here's a quick video brought to you by ESPN detailing USC in that 1970 game featuring Sam Cunningham that starting the process of integration in major college football throughout. Remember, in the 1970s, the Southwestern Conference was one of the last conferences to integrate. So a lot of people were wondering, what's going on. So please check this video out. I'm Jamar Harp, and this is Sports 101.
In the 1960s, Alabama was pretty much like it was during the slavery years. Blacks were still very much treated as inferior citizens, segregated by race from much of the political and economic life of the state.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
This was Alabama in the 1960s.
I saw the images of the dogs and the fire hoses and the marches, and saw that on television and was just amazed at how much carnage was happening and didn't really understand why.
As the 1970s dawned, Alabama was still in the throes of the struggle for civil rights, and Bear Bryant's Crimson Tide was still all white. Then, Bryant asked his good friend John McKay of USC if he'd bring his Trojans to Birmingham to open the 1970 season.
He said that we were going to play the University of Alabama in Birmingham, and that, we're going to focus on just the football aspect of it and not worry about the civil rights situation.
By 1970, USC had 18 black players on the varsity roster. There was only one black player in the Alabama program, Wilbur Jackson. Like all freshmen at the time, he was ineligible to play for the varsity. To accelerate the rate of integration on the Alabama football team, the Afro-American Student Association had filed suit in 1969. The association was represented by a young attorney named U.W. Clement.
The black students at Alabama were determined to require Bear Bryant to recruit black players. It was important for us to be a part of that institution.
The question was, if we can win without them, right? That's where some in the Alabama fan base were. Look, we're really good without that, so why do we want to do that?
Many have theorized that Bear Bryant had one singular motivation for scheduling USC: to demonstrate for Alabama's fans why the time for change had arrived.
The vast majority of black Alabamians felt as I and cheered for USC.
September 12th, 1970, Legion Field.
Playing Southern Cal, it was terrific. Fans were excited. The place was just electric.
Sam Cunningham, USC's backup fullback, entered the game on the Trojans' opening possession.
Our spring practice was tougher than that game. I mean, the holes looked like you could drive a car through them, and no disrespect to Alabama.
Our guys on defense were as tough as a $3 steak, and they just could not get him down.
Cunningham scored twice in the first quarter. He was unstoppable, as were most of his teammates on offense and defense. The Crimson Tide, the pride of Southern football, got manhandled. The Trojan offense gained 559 yards. Sam Cunningham carried the ball 12 times for 135 yards.
Their black guys were bigger, stronger, faster. Their white guys were bigger, stronger, faster. And if they had any polka dot guys, they were bigger, stronger, and faster.
The final score, 42-21. If Bear Bryant had truly hoped the Trojans would make a point that was impossible for Alabama fans to misunderstand, they had, and then some.
At the end of the game, Bear Bryant was in the middle of the field with the biggest smile you've ever seen in your whole life, smiling, shaking McKay's hand. Did you ever see Bear Bryant smile after such a loss?
When it was over, Bryant would personally thank and congratulate Sam Cunningham. The black citizens of Birmingham gave thanks as well.
Outside of the stadium, there were hundreds of black people, not a white face there. And they were singing hymns and holding candles, and a couple were beating Bibles on the bus. Happy that we were there with them. Happy that we'd done what we'd done.
Soon, the Afro-American Student Association withdrew its lawsuit.
The only aim for the lawsuit was to require Bear Bryant to recruit black football players. Once that game was over, Bear Bryant got religion. And he started recruiting black players like a missionary. In my own mind, from a racial point of view, it's by far the most important football game in collegiate history.
Football game was played, we got on the airplane and went back home. Football in the Deep South was changed forever from that moment on.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live stream.
Thank you so much. Again, that video comes to us from ESPN. Now, basically, the video talked about how Alabama integrated its team. The one issue I have with this, and I've always had this when the story comes up, is that the narrative constructed that Bear Bryant somehow coyfully did this on purpose. You got to remember, before this game, they were still segregated, whether people were around them. The Alabama A&Ms, were John Stallworths and the greats at this time, all those greats that were going to Grambling and FAMU in the 70s, Bob Hayes. These are NFL stars, all pros, Olympic gold medalists. At this time, it was not wanted there. Now, once they lost, not only did the loss bring the need to integrate in, but people started to see money. With that game, it was also one of the first games to be broadcast on quote unquote television. Remember, television and showing games, that wasn't happening all the time. It might have been one or two games on Saturday. So all this was happening at the same time. So the need to get this money also fueled the reason for integration. It wasn't necessarily because they thought it was the right thing to do. And that's what I always defend that. Now, outside of the video, Bear Bryant was also quoted as saying, "I will not get any black players until I need some." Now, obviously, you can substitute black for, another derogatory name, but that's a statement that Bear Bryant often said. So again, if you make this statement, how can you set this game up because you really wanted black players? If you remember, the man in the video says segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. That was the governor of the state of Alabama. Him and Bear Bryant were tight friends. Now, getting back to the current program, one possibility for the Pac-12 would be to simply replace USC and UCLA with other Western schools that generally have competitive football programs. Some possible schools could be San Diego State, Boise State, and Fresno State. Now, two of those schools are in California and not major markets, and then Idaho is definitely not a major market. Again, none of these schools will have the brand names that the Trojans and Bruins had, and the television networks will not see these additions worthy of a massive rights deal, henceforth why the conference will go down. Another option will be to approach the Big 12 about some sort of merger, which is probably too late, again, because USC and UCLA jumped ahead of the curve and left without telling anyone else. The conference already has dealt with crippling losses, and I'm referencing the Big 12. The Big 12 has had crippling losses with their losses of Texas and Oklahoma for the SEC starting in 2025. Now, after that announcement, the Big 12 reportedly reached out to the Pac-12 about a merger, but was rebuked. Instead, the Big 12 replaced the two football titans with Cincinnati, BYU, Houston, and Central Florida. Now, again, the Southern Ohio market will be considered big. Cincinnati is right across the bridge from Kentucky, and we know how Kentucky is talked about in popular culture. Obviously, Utah is more known for polygamy and its Mormon faith. Houston is a major market. However, being a former Conference USA school and being in the state of Texas, being outshadowed by Texas and Texas A&M, and obviously Central Florida being outshadowed by the major programs in Florida, Florida State, Florida, Miami, and I'm probably missing one, but you get the point. So on Friday, the Pac-12 released a statement that said the conference will explore all expansion options with the losses of USC and UCLA. Now, the 10 remaining university presidents and chancellors remain committed to sharing a goal of academic and athletic excellence on behalf of their student athletes. So basically what they're saying is if you want to get admitted to the Pac-12, you got to be an R1 research institution to fit these same goals. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Sports 101. I'm Jamar Harp. We're going to take a quick break and we'll come right back. While you're on your break, please go to your favorite smart device, your TV, whatever. Search SportsZone Chicago and add that channel on your Roku. Remember, SportsZone Chicago is now on Roku. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. I'm Jamar Harp and this is Sports 101.
Progressive presents the Sports Flash on the SportsZone Chicago. Cubs righty Kyle Hendricks left Tuesday's game with the Brewers after only 3 innings due to a sore right throwing shoulder. It was the shortest of Hendricks' 16 starts this season. He allowed a 2-run homer to Rowdy Tellez in the first, but didn't give up any more runs. Seiya Suzuki homered for the second straight night as the Cubs beat the Brewers 8-3 on Tuesday. Suzuki broke a 2-all tie and put the Cubs ahead for good by lining a 2-run shot just to the right of the left field foul pole in the 5th. He also had an RBI single in the Cubs' 4-run 6th. The Twins beat the White Sox 8-2 in Chicago on Tuesday. Michael Kopech suffered the loss. He went 4 2/3, giving up 6 runs on 8 hits. 5 strikeouts along the way. New Blackhawks head coach Luke Richardson getting set for the NHL draft this Thursday. Things get underway in Montreal. No first-round picks for the Hawks, but they have a pair in the second round, 38th and 57th overall. For lightning fast sports updates, download the Score app. It's free and one of the most popular sports apps in North America. I'm Chuck Sanders. That's the Sports Flash on the SportsZone Chicago.
Nobody protects you from mayhem like Allstate. I'm a speed bump. Did you hear what I said? I'm a speed bump. And if you have cut rate car insurance, the cost to reattach your muffler could really be a bump in the road. So switch to Allstate, save money, and be better protected from mayhem, like me.
Based on coverage and limits selected, subject to terms, conditions, and availability. In most states, prices vary based on how you buy. Allstate Bar and Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates, Northbrook, Illinois.
Thanks, everyone, for baking your way here on this toasty morning. Are you all ready to jam? Excellent. Before we get rolling, let's start by hashing out everything bagel we'll be discussing. Profit margins are okay, but they could maybe be butter. Sorry, I don't mean to waffle. Next quarter, it's all or muffin. Did you have a question, Sausage Patty?
My name's Patricia.
When you can't take your mind off breakfast, it matters where you stay. Delicious breakfast available at our Hilton family of brands. Hilton, for the stay.
Please stop and listen because this important message may directly apply to you or someone dear to you. Several thousand African American former full-time CPS teachers were unfairly terminated starting in the mid-90s and continuing to the 2000s. If you are one of those many former CPS teachers who was unjustly terminated, or if you are the immediate relative of a now deceased unjustly terminated former CPS teacher, you may qualify to participate in a lawsuit at no upfront cost to you. Please call 773-580-7183 immediately for more information. That's 773-580-7183. Do not delay. Act today, because time is of the essence. That's 773-580-7183.
Welcome back. I'm Jamar Harp, and again, this is Sports 101, a show that discusses sport beyond the X's and O's. We talk about the game from a people, places, and cultural perspective through the lens of history in the past, present, as well as in the making. Please make sure you get social with Sports 101, Sean and Maya in the Morning, our flagship show, and the litany of other shows on SportsZone Chicago by following SportsZone Chicago on social media. You can find SportsZone Chicago on Twitter at SportsZone CHI, Facebook at SportsZone Chicago, and Instagram at SportsZone Chicago. Remember, subscribe to the YouTube channel, search SportsZone Chicago, but more importantly, download the SportsZone Chicago app. The SportsZone Chicago app you can find on iTunes, Google Play, Amazon, and now go to Roku or your favorite smart device, type in SportsZone Chicago, download that channel and add it. SportsZone Chicago is everywhere. Remember, SportsZone Chicago, your favorite sports talk app, is now on Roku. Now, before the break, we talked about the Pac-12 and losing its two flagship schools, USC and UCLA, to the Big Ten. Now, I'd like to go into our next segment is conference expansion over. Now, don't expect conference expansion or realignment to stop with USC and UCLA leaving for the Big Ten. Remember, we talked about all the other Pac-12 schools that are still seeking to try to get in the mix to be in the Big 32, as well as other schools that still may want to join the SEC from, let's say, the ACC. Another worry for the Pac-12 is that the Big 10 or Big 12 will try to poach more schools from what is now a severely weakened conference. So what if the Big 10 decides the Trojans and Bruins need more West Coast partners? So Oregon and Washington have the most prestige, while Stanford and Cal have the academic pedigree the Big 10 desires. I definitely don't see Oregon being left out because that's, Nike Foundation. And if you add Oregon, you have to add someone else. So I believe the Big Ten is going to take two more teams. They may take four, but I know for a fact they're going to take two more teams. Also, what if the Big 12 views Utah and Colorado as good fits and would like to build around them? The Utes have a natural rivalry with BYU, and the Buffaloes previously were a member of the Big 12 before leaving for the Pac-12 in 2011. So different things can shake up. In this picture right here, you'll see that our next segment, Notre Dame and conference realignment. Well, they play a part in this. Now, Notre Dame's football brand is one of the strongest in the nation, and what the school decides to do could be the ultimate deciding bell in what top college football will look like in the future. So as it stands right now, currently, Notre Dame is a full member of the ACC in all sports except football and hockey. In football, Notre Dame has a scheduling agreement with the ACC in which it plays 5 games per season against teams from that conference. However, they're not a member. It's widely assumed that Notre Dame's quasi-independent status in football is unattainable when considering the amount of money that the Big Ten and SEC school deals will end up making from their television deals, which now make Notre Dame's deal with NBC allowance for a child. Speaking of that deal, the Fighting Irish's television deal with NBC, the football's broadcast home since 1991, is worth $15 million annually, and Notre Dame gets an estimated $10 million or $11 million annually from the ACC. So that's about $25 million annually from its broadcasting. Now, it's estimated that the Big Ten and SEC teams annually could receive $80 million to $100 million when a conference television deal is worked out. So $25 million to $100 million, that's a big difference. So now you see why Notre Dame is caught between a rock and a hard place. They can't say, I have my own deal now that's better than what you guys are doing. Now they're getting blew out the water, and they're in danger, even being Notre Dame Catholic, not Catholic U, which is in D.C., but, representing, Catholics everywhere as their flagship athletic school. They could be in danger of falling to a second-tier status. Now, doing this math and adding up conference checks, Notre Dame days of the football semi-independent are most likely numbered. Again, when the NBC deal for decades is financially insignificant against the need for any conference, it's insignificant now. So now they would need to leave. Before, it kind of served its purpose when they first started dealing with NBC in the early 1990s. That deal ends after the 2025 season. The agreement with the ACC runs through 2036, but the windfall it could get from another conference would make it the departure more painless, meaning they have to spend that much money. Now, the Big Ten would be a prime destination to me. It will make the most sense. Number one, the team hailing from South Bend, Indiana, which is deep in the Big Ten territory, and has traditional rivals such as USC and UCLA joining the Big Ten. With those considerations, now it seems a pretty much moot point in a modern sports landscape that things are going to continue to change. And ACC without Notre Dame football will put that conference again in dire straits. One reason because the long-term television deal worked out with ESPN, which they did in 2019, now looks quaint compared to the other ones in place or soon to be done for the Big Ten and then the SEC again once when Oklahoma and Texas join. Now the conference as a whole gets about $230 million per year from the deal. The Big Ten is looking at an annual television payment around $1 billion per year. So again, Notre Dame is, you're in the background in regards to making money in your television deals. And please don't forget the ACC television deal is locked into 2036. Please check out this video right here, and we're going to discuss the Notre Dame deal. And this video is brought to you by ESPN College Football. So again, this video is brought to you by ESPN College Football, and it's going to give some insight on this Notre Dame deal with NBC.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to... This is Africa, and here's Liberia. Now let's have a look, shall we? Liberia's story begins a very long time ago, but those ancient inhabitants left very few traces of themselves. But as the centuries passed, various tribes migrated into the land, following the collapse of larger empires to the north. And to this day, the land is home to many different peoples, such as the Pele, Bassa, and Kru, agricultural and metalworking societies ruled by chiefs and following animist religions. In the 1400s, the Portuguese sailed about the area, which came to be known as the Grain Coast, because of the trade in grains of the then very...
Apologize for the technical difficulty. That video wasn't loaded properly. Basically, what the video talked about is, again, how Notre Dame was in the forefront in the 1990s, establishing a deal with NBC. At that time, in 1990, no one thought of having a network deal. This is before the BCS, when the sports writers determined a national champion, and Notre Dame was ahead of its time for almost 30 years. Now with other conferences catching up, and again with the Big Ten considering 3 options, including some online streaming options and 2 major networks, Notre Dame must again have to adjust and keep up with modern times as they still want to be viable in this ever-changing collegiate football landscape, which is now predicated on how much money you can make with television deals so you can support all your non-revenue and Olympic sports. And then the second part, what your revenue sports is, what type of collective can you get to pony up $1 million per player in quote-unquote NIL deals. So that's the current landscape of collegiate sports, and particularly football. And if Notre Dame doesn't keep up, they will fall behind. If any school wishes to leave, It reportedly will have to pay more than $50 million to break the grant of rights or else surrender its new media rights deals to the ACC. And this is what's in place with the ACC. So again, that makes the move by USC and UCLA even more tactful because they left when they had no financial penalty. However, the SEC or Big Ten could promise a school $80 million annually to leave for their television deal, which would pay for or subsidize their payment to their former conference and leave them with a profit of around $30 to $40 million. So this is also an option in the future. It's speculating Clemson, Florida State, Miami, and maybe Virginia Tech will be natural targets for the SEC, while North Carolina, Duke, Virginia, and perhaps Syracuse will be the Big Ten targets. Now, me personally, I would like to see Pitt and West Virginia getting the Big Ten. That would help because Pitt and Penn State have a natural rivalry being in the same state. And then West Virginia is right next to Western Pittsburgh. My little league, we used to do our fundraisers there, Wheeling Downs, the racetracks. Actually, you have to fly into Pittsburgh because there's no airport in Morgantown. So and they call that rivalry the backyard brawl. It was amazing. Like in the early 90s when I was a real little kid, they had a quarterback from Pittsburgh, West Virginia did. He was above his time. His name was Major Harris. He was flat out amazing. You also had stars like my current boss right now, Sean Gilbert, Reuben Brown, a lot of Pitt stars, Steve Israel, and countless others, Saragusa, Burt Grossman. A lot of great Pitt athletes played in that backyard brawl, and I think with geography, adding them to the Big Ten will make more sense. Syracuse, they've never been consistently good in football in modern times. I'm not counting the Jim Brown era, so I don't think they would be good. And I think what Pitt brings, and also you got Maryland and Rutgers right there. I think those teams will be great in the Big Ten, and that's what I'd love to see. Because I'd love to see Pitt, Iowa. So me and Maya can go back and forth, or Pitt, Penn State, Pitt, West Virginia, and some of the older rivalries. So that's what I'm hoping happens. Next, what is college football going to look like in 2026? If things keep changing, how many conferences will we have? We have Power 5 right now. Will be a Power 2. Will the Power 2 leave the NCAA and say we're doing our own thing and we're going to get more television deals? Who knows? But let's talk about it. College football has driven all of this and the college football playoffs through television contracts of ESPN, which expires after the 2025 season. So after the 2025 season, get your popcorn ready. It's going to be a lot of moving and shaking. After that, the college sports landscape as we know it can receive a wholesale makeover. Again, with all these contracts ending after the 2025 season, it's going to be the wild, wild west with teams going to different conferences. So what if the Big Ten and the SEC continue their likely raid of other conferences to the point where their size and strength are such that they decide to leave the NCAA entirely, entering into talks with the television networks about creating their own, personal network or group, similar to what the Premier League teams wanted to do in Europe, and just say we're bigger than the NCAA. You could do this. You may not have to go to school. You may not. So it'll be parts of the old Big 12, the old Southern Conference. We saw those movies where the football field is my classroom. You can have elements of that because, again, the enrollment and participation in football will not be driven by the NCAA's rules because they're not a part of the NCAA anymore. It'll be driven by the television contracts. So they may not require you or not being in the NCAA. These schools may say you're required to take 2 classes a semester and we'll pay for you as long as you want until you graduate because, we're making so much money off these television deals. You get a full scholarship in perpetuity until you graduate. So who knows what can happen. Any school not desired by one of these 2 conferences could be left to the scraps. So you can see Big 12, Pac-12 schools being called mid-majors. You might see some of the mid-majors now drop down to FCS, the Miami of Ohio's, the MAC conference, things like that. You never know because it's all predicated off these dominoes that fall, and particularly what Notre Dame does and who they join. Because if they decide to join the ACC then the ACC may say, oh, now we got a foothold. We're going to try to build and try to poach. If Notre Dame joins the Big 12, the ACC may tuck its tail and say, now we're going to lose teams to the SEC, so we're pretty much defunct now. So, again, wait till 2026. You heard about it first here on SportsZone Chicago, on Roku, Facebook, and YouTube, and on Sports101, featuring Jamar Harp. Now, what if the Big Ten again decided to break away from the NCAA but bring along 64 teams in the Power 5 conferences, which will be the Big Ten, SEC, ACC, Big 12, and Pac-12, and then add Notre Dame and just say we're all of us aren't in NCAA anymore? That's also another option. If that happened, there would be fewer teams left out, but still plenty of them. And let's not forget about college basketball, which doesn't bring in nearly the money that college football does, but still generates tons of revenue, thanks in great part to the NCAA's television contracts for its men's and women's basketball tournament annually. The NCAA's deal with CBS and Turner Sports for the men's tournament currently runs through 2032, and its blue blood and Cinderella format tournament style makes it compelling television every March. So basically, what they're saying is we may not see anything till this deal runs out in 2032 for the entire school if they want their basketball teams to be a part of this as well too. The football may leave earlier, but around 2032, if the basketball teams aren't satisfied, they'll do the same thing as the football teams are doing. Now, what if these blue bloods basking in the prospect of further college football riches decide to lead the NCAA and create their own football tournament? Who knows? Pick 4 and 5 here, you'll see the last point of topic that we talked about, this conference expansion. This past week, there was a few articles due to success of Coach Prime, Deion Sanders at Jackson State. Here is the cover of Sports Illustrated with the HBCU FCS on the cover. You'll see Coach Prime obviously in the center. To the right, you have Travis Hunter, who was a #1 athlete in the 2022 signing class, who signed with FCS Jackson State. Again, he was a #1 athlete in all of America, and he signed with Jackson State. And to the left, obviously, you have Coach Prime's son, Shador Sanders, who was a Walter Payton Award finalist last year, should be again this year, and his true sophomore season with Jackson State. Also, you have this next picture right here that can also detail if the big boys are doing it, the HBCU conferences may do a super conference. So you see the CIAA, which is a Division II conference, which I work and participate in now as a member of staff of Livingstone College in Salisbury, North Carolina. You also have the MEAC, Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference, which is a Division I conference on the East Coast that lost a lot of teams, but still has 6 teams currently to get that HU bid to the FCS playoffs. Then you have the SIAC, which is the CIAA's counterpart, which is the Deep South Division II HBCU conference, along with the Southwestern Athletic Conference, which is, again, the Deep South is SCS HBCU conference. The SWAC has great history along with the MEAC, as well as all 4 conferences, but most notably the SWAC and the MEAC, being Division I conferences, have put out a litany of athletes in the professional sports in integration and segregation, both eras. Now, speaking of Jackson State, what the conversation was going last year and only losing 1 game to South Carolina State in the Celebration Bowl, or 2 games. They lost to FBS opponent Louisiana Monroe 12-9, which is, again, why people are saying if Deion continues this success and having this same COFO Renaissance movement where the top Black athletes were coming to HBCU similar to how it was before integration, that Jackson State can make a move to the Big Ten. Now, the future of collegiate athletes will focus on strategic business partnerships within the FBS, which is, the Football Bowl subdivision, and FCS, formerly known as 1AA, or the Football Championship subdivision. Now, this recent flurry of activity will not subside anytime soon. It may be time for the HBCU conferences, the Southwestern Athletic Conference, Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference, Central Intercollegiate Athletic Association, and the Southern Intercollegiate Athletic Conference to get into the game before bargaining power swings to more progressive conferences, meaning predominantly white institutions that compete on the FCS or Division II level will get in the mix and start moving up. Now, there are correct notions of that's not what Coach Robinson, meaning the famous and iconic Coach Eddie Robinson at Grambling University, or Coach Gaither at FAMU would have wanted for the SWAC or MEAC must end. Oftentimes, people say that these legendary coaches wanted to stay segregated. What they wanted is they wanted to keep the best athletes that looked like them, that were supposed to go to those schools, to stay at those schools. They didn't necessarily want to stay segregated. And at times where they were coaching, they wanted to play the Alabamas and the Clemsons and the USCs, but they wouldn't play them because why would I play this school that's an FCS school? They have bigger, faster players than me, and then they put players in the first round in the NCAA in the NFL draft consistently from 1950 moving forward. So it wouldn't make sense. Influential business deals, however, are brewing between major FBS conferences and sports networks that may trickle down to the FCS and Division II level that can help these HBCUs increase their visibility in the national market and as well increase the Sankofa or Renaissance movement with African-American athletes on all levels deciding to come back home. Again, these HBCUs can't take the wait and see approach anymore. You got to be like USC and UCLA and be ahead of the curve and get out there and start making moves. If you look at what North Carolina A&T is doing, they left the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference, which is his home conference, and then went to the Big South Conference. After this year, they'll be leaving the Big South Conference, going to the CAA, the Colonial Athletic Association, which is often called the SEC of the FCS. The reason being, although North Dakota State wins a multitude of championships in the Missouri Valley Conference, that conference, top to bottom, isn't as tough as the CAA, who have multiple teams every year that are in the final four of the FCS. Now, A&T's next goal is for the CAA to jump mid-major and maybe go to the MAC or something like that. So they were bent on being an HBCU on the FBS level. However, I know from past experiences, and again, using Japanese baseball versus Negro League baseball as a reference, when Jackie Robinson went by himself, the Negro Leagues folded. But the Japanese leagues hold their best players back for around 6 or 7 years, I believe, before they can go to Major League Baseball or anywhere else, thus promoting the integrity and the competitive of the Japanese league. So if the HBCUs don't do that, they could fold, chasing the cheese. Last year, Oklahoma and Texas finally saw the writing on the wall and left the Big 12 to follow Texas A&M to the SEC. I just mentioned North Carolina A&T. However, Hampton is in a similar situation when they went to the Big South and jumped to the CAA as well. So Hampton and A&T are pretty much mirroring each other right now in their quest to be an HBCU on the FBS level. Howard flirted with leaving the MEAC after FAMU and Bethune-Cookman left. However, they decided to stay and forego the invitation to the CAA. Now, just like North Carolina A&T and the founding members of the MEAC, USC and UCLA were founding members of the Pac-12. Yet the Big Ten lured them away with guarantees for significant gains in revenues and the ability to pay for all its sports comfortably. You don't want to cut anything and cause PR a nightmare, especially if you're cutting the all women's sports in a Title IX era. I don't think that would go well. Now, each Big Ten school will share a projected $1 billion deal with a major broadcasting network or maybe 3 broadcasting networks. This deal should net nearly $1 million per institution a year. Again, $1 million. So why couldn't the SWAC and MEAC combine to do the same or broker a lucrative agreement with ESPN, Fox, NBC, etc.? Dr. Kenyatta Conville, who was an HBCU insider, tweeted, "There are too many broadcasting platforms seeking content for the money to run out," referencing the Big Ten and SEC deals. So what he's saying is these other platforms will say, hey, the Big Ten and SEC is making all this money through sponsorships, getting these conferences in football. So even though I'm a smaller platform, I might want to get, all HBCU games, Division I and Division II. So he's stating that there's platforms out there to do that. The current state for the remaining conferences is to figure out their market value, then ascertain do they want to stay where they're at or try to fight and move forward. Consider this point, the Pac-12 will immediately go on the offense seeking conference expansion. In February, Byron Allen of Allen Media Group and Entertainment property, HBCU Go TV, which is an app, he officially inked a deal to stream 2,000 SWAC athletic events annually. Byron Allen told HBCU Legends that this was a second-figure partnership between the Southwestern Athletic Conference and HBCU Go, which will be the online provider. Now, two of the SWAC schools, Florida A&M and Grambling, signed a contract with Urban Edge Networks and HBCU League Pass to stream content. So obviously this is a contradiction. Now, HBCU Game Day, Stephen Gaither reported that Urban Edge Networks has filed a lawsuit against the SWAC and is pending, citing improper and illegal interference. So Urban Edge Networks signed a deal with the entire conference. However, Florida A&M and Grambling are saying that what they signed with Urban Edge Network doesn't impede what the conference deal is, because they can put content outside of athletic events. They can put step shows, this is my room, or college cribs, or different little shows you see on a college campus to promote and growth and vision of that school. So they necessarily don't have to show football games. So that lawsuit came because, again, HBCU Game Day said, we want everything. So again, the lawsuit stems from the idea on content being all content filmed at the schools, or is it just football rights? Here are some other unsubstantiated rumors swirling around the HBCU world for all our HBCU fans. The first is Tennessee State may decide to join the HBCU conference. Now, Tennessee State for a while was an independent. However, when they joined the Ohio Valley Conference, they saw a drop in their attendance. Even though they play in Tennessee Titan Stadium in downtown Nashville, the school's located in Nashville, being an HBCU and the Ohio Valley Conference, their fans want to see them play against the SWAC and MEAC teams and other Division I HBCUs versus the directional schools and East Tennessee State, Tennessee Tech, Tennessee Chattanooga, and other Ohio Valley Conference teams. So when you look at Tennessee State, they'll have low numbers of attendance. But anytime they play Jackson State and that classic, or sometimes they may play someone else, it's always over 70,000 people there. So a lot of people are saying that Tennessee State, under the new leadership of Eddie George, is going to see the big picture and try to join the Southwestern Athletic Conference or the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference to bolster the Division I HBCU conferences. The next is Howard keeping his options open after declining the CAA invitation. So previously I stated that Howard turned down the CAA, unlike his former conference partners, North Carolina A&T and Hampton. So most people think they're just going to stay in the MEAC. They could be plotting for another move, most likely to the Northeastern Conference, as Howard supports a lot of sports that other MEAC schools didn't have, such as men's soccer. However, the Northeastern Conference has baseball, men's soccer. It can take these sports that the MEAC teams had that they couldn't find competition with. Next, Jackson State, Grambling, or FAMU could leave together and all go FBS. That is the purpose of the article that came out in regards to the success of Coach Prime, Coach Willie Simmons, the anticipated success of former Cincinnati Bengals coach Hugh Jackson, who was not Grambling State. So people are talking maybe these teams will just get so good, they want to take it back, old school, and want to play Alabama, or Grambling will want to play LSU. Because you got to remember, in the state of Louisiana, it's not LSU as the most Hall of Fame football players. It's Grambling State. So again, that may be an option. Next rumors would be Morgan State may explore leaving the MEAC with their new hire, former Bowie State head coach Damon Wilson, as he's taking over the Morgan State Bears program. He's consistently stated that he wants to be the best team on the FCS level and win a national championship, not be the best HBCU. Also, you have a more problematic scenario if either SWAC institutions jettisons the conference, bargaining with a network become less powerful. So if the SWAC said we want to get a deal like the Big Ten and the SEC, and a conference or a television provider was saying, okay, well, you're FCS, but a lot of people see this, and you are getting talent that's, traditionally would have went FBS until recently. So we can't give you each school $100 million a year, but let's say we give each school $50 million a year. So that deal is set. The next thing you know, Jackson State, Grambling, FAMU, and Southern all leave to go FBS. That deal will probably get pulled, henceforth hurting the rest of those teams. So it's imperative, again, to keep this Japanese baseball mentality where we all got to move up together. Remember, the Three Musketeers, all for one and one for all. Jackson State currently, with head coach Deion Sanders, has the largest attendance in the FCS and is more attractive partner in the SWAC. So if they can keep this up, and after they get their first Appalachian State or win against an FBS team, that's when the money will come in. So also currently, Florida A&M's head coach Willie Simmons winning legacy is only second to Jackson State at this time. Again, last year they lost in that epic game in Miami Dolphin Stadium 10-9 at the beginning of the year. A lot of people say that FAMU wasn't sold on his quarterback, so they could have did better. But however, the game will be played again this year, so please tune in, watch Jackson State versus Florida A&M, as well as the rest of the MEAC and Southwestern Athletic coverage. Again, if U Jackson is successful in 2022, could Grambling write his ticket somewhere else? Any of these departures would make negotiations stressful for the SWAC commissioner, Dr. Charles McClellan, to get a big-time deal. So to avoid this issue, the SWAC and MEAC need to do a swift progression towards a new partnership that can thwart any team that thinks about leaving. Because you know how it is, monkey see, monkey do. The SWAC-MEAC merger would make the most sense and become financially more potent in the long run. So if both conferences merge and become one super Division I HBCU conference, it will be more attractive to go to a television deal and say, hey, we're all together now. We're going to play each other, and our champion is going to go to the FCS playoffs. Can we get a deal so each team can get $50 million annually? Now, what that would do is allow building to come up and begin on these schools, sort of like the arms race happening at the predominantly white institutions in the late 60s and early 70s that attract the African-American players away from historically black colleges and universities. So with $50 million annually, you should be able to upgrade your facilities as well as your campus to entice more players like Travis Hunter and Kevin Coleman, 2 top 5 players in their class, to come to an HBCU. NCAA reporter Stan Beckton wrote that the MEAC is on edge because it has 6 or fewer teams. And if Howard would have left, they would have lost their HU bid to the FCS playoffs. Again, should the SWAC and MEAC combine forces to form a 20-team super conference, they can finally vie for an automatic FCS playoff bid. They'll have greater strength of schedule. So you can see these Jackson State, North Dakota State games, or Tennessee State versus Jacksonville State in Alabama. Who knows? What we do know is that SWAC and the MEAC will negotiate more financial broadcasting streaming rights as a package deal versus separate. The upper tier teams could decide to break away and form a new HBCU super conference should a merger fail between both conferences and negotiate terms with new broadcast partners. Another could be former FAMU AD Courtney Gaucher, who was let go for some political reasons. However, he's the man and the architect behind FAMU's football success right now and the hiring of Willie Simmons. He was rumored as being the commissioner of this quote-unquote HBCU super conference. Eventually, in the super conference, they would like it to move to the FBS level, because what the HBCUs are saying, if I'm on the FBS level and you're on the FBS level, why wouldn't the top black players come to me? If I'm getting $100 million a year and I can build what you have, and I'm on the FBS, then I'm going to make you irrelevant. So that's the goal all the time. And I think I agree with that. And I would love to see that on TV. And it sort of take me back to the Glory Rose movie where you had Kentucky with Pat Riley and Adolph Rupp playing Texas Western, which is University of Texas El Paso right now, and an all-black starting five and an all-white starting five for Kentucky, which again is a paradigm because if you look at modern-day Kentucky, you wouldn't really think of majority players of European descent. So that just goes to show you how things can flip within 40 years. The Division II conferences, the SIAC and the CIAA, has also joined the former Super Conference in hopes of winning Division II playoffs. Could Dr. Kiki Barber broker a new partnership with the Gulf Coast Conference and have them come as well too? And instead of having HBCU teams leave, the HBCUs can get teams to join the HBCU conference. Also, could programs like Morgan State jump into the Southwestern Athletic Conference? Also, what about Langston and Oklahoma? What are they going to do? So again, there's so much news, but again, working together and using that African proverb, if you work together, two mice can tap a line, you can get a lot of things done. You see USC and UCLA are moving together and not doing it separately. So I hope everyone sees that as an example. Now, in closing, I would like to leave you with these a few things. Well, the Big 32, if it happens to go this way, leave college football and players' independence. Well, television deals assist in blue blood schools leaving the NCAA altogether. Well, the HBCU or HBCU conference assimilate on the FBS level. Also, with the For the Culture movement right now, and what I mean by that is that's FBS players of African-American descent deciding they want to go FCS and they're still going to go pro and eventually hope to play a BCS team at the FCS and beat them. And that's the For the Culture movement, while you see Jackson State taking advantage of that, as well as the other teams in the MEAC and SWAC. Will that still be prevalent, and will it help HBCUs or the SWAC or the MEAC jump into the Big 32? Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Sports 101. Again, I'm your host, Jamar Harp, and you can follow me on social media at Twitter at Coach_Harp412 and Facebook under Jamar Harp. Make sure you get social with Sports 101 and a litany of other shows on SportsZone Chicago by following SportsZone Chicago on social media. You can find SportsZone Chicago on Twitter at SportsZone CHI, Facebook at SportsZone Chicago, and Instagram at SportsZone Chicago. Please remember, SportsZone Chicago now can also be found on your favorite smart device by going to your Roku, searching SportsZone Chicago, and adding the channel to your Roku list on your favorite smart device. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, search SportsZone Chicago, but more importantly, download the SportsZone Chicago app. The SportsZone Chicago app can be found in the iTunes, Google Play, and Amazon stores. Thank you for tuning in another week's episode of Sports 101. I will see you next week at our normally scheduled time, Wednesday, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. Hopefully I have some great news. I got a great interview Friday, and hopefully I can bless y'all with some great news, and I'm packing bags and getting on the road again next week, well, soon. So again, thank you for tuning in to another week's episode of Sports 101. I'm your host, Jamar Harp, and I'm gone.